When you have a newborn at home, your house will start to fill up with all sorts of different gadgets and gizmos that are supposed to make your life much easier. At least that's what they advertise. Little did I know that you have to have an engineering degree to learn how to use all of these gadgets and gizmos. And you would think that with it being newborn phase, that everything would be simple and easy, especially knowing that the parents are absolutely sleep deprived and they're struggling as it is. And I think it's some sort of cruel and sick joke that they make these things so complicated and difficult to understand. And there's been many times that as Reagan has kind of progressed through her early developmental stages, that as we pick up some of these new things, I realize that I am out of practice with how to use some of these early gadgets. And it's made me realize I've probably been doing several things wrong in life without even realizing it or without acknowledging it. And so sure enough, I started researching what are some common things that I've been doing wrong that I should actually be doing right. And turns out it's a pretty big list. Number one, my parents taught me how to tie a double knot in my shoes, and hopefully my shoes don't come untied this evening, and I take a tumble. But I didn't realize that in order to untie a double knot in your shoes, all you have to do is grab the laces and just pull. I had no clue, and when I read that, I thought, no way. And so I went into my closet, I pulled out some shoes, tied a double knot, and I grabbed the lace ends, and I just tugged really hard, and it came undone. 30 years of fiddling around with this double knot and trying to get my fingernails in there and trying to undo this knot. All you got to do is just pull the shoelaces real tight, and it comes undone. Avocado seeds. Now, I am a 30-year-old person, and I have moved beyond baby food, so I don't eat avocados unless it includes lime and tomatoes and jalapenos, and it looks like guacamole. It is guacamole, but I don't eat just normal avocados. I think that's baby food. But apparently, I've seen a lot of people, when they do cut open an avocado, they just take the knife and they, almost like Rambo style, they attack the seed and then they twist the seed out, and I guess that's one way of doing it. But in order to get the seed out, all you have to do is squeeze one side and then squeeze the other side, and the seed will just fall out. Didn't realize that. Tim, being an English major in the office, I'm always self-conscious of if I'm saying things correctly and appropriately. And as I've learned recently, not from Tim, just from studying and reading, there's a difference between further and farther. Further is to emphasize a literary point or a metaphorical point that you are trying to further exemplify. Farther is for distance. And so all these years of me saying, oh yeah, that McDonald's is further down the road, that's grammatically incorrect. I've been doing that wrong. Ceiling fans have a summer and winter mode. I didn't know this either. And so at 1 in the morning, I go in and look at our ceiling fan, and sure enough, there's a little switch there. And one has a sundial, and the other one has a little snowflake. As hot air rises, you can turn your ceiling fans to where it will push the hot air down, giving kind of some sort of warmth. And then in the winter or in the summer, there's another mode that it would bring the cool air up from the ground and kind of circulate it a little bit better. And then this one really hit home to me. We love microwave popcorn, probably not the best thing for us, but we eat it anyways. That little slit, rather than just burning your fingers as steam is coming out of it, it's meant for you to take the popcorn bag, flip it upside down, and shake all the kernels out. And then you can have your popcorn bag without all those kernels busting your teeth. This is just a short list of things that I've realized I've been doing wrong for most of my life, if not all of my life, at least my adult life. And there are many more things to this list that we could add. And that's what made me realize that experience does not necessarily equate expertise. Just because I've been doing something for 20 or 30 years does not mean that I'm an expert in doing something for that long. I remember going to welding school and thinking, I've welded before, I'm just here to get the degree, I don't need any of the instruction. And sure enough, they were teaching me things that I didn't know. And even though I had years of welding, it took school for me to realize that I actually probably need to learn some of these things. The same was the case when I went to a motorcycle school to get my motorcycle endorsement for riding on the streets. I thought, well, I've been raised on dirt bikes, I don't need to know all of this information. And when I went to the school, I showed up late. I thought, this is all easy. I know how to ride a bike. Just give me my endorsement, and I'll be on my way. And they taught me several things that I did not know. And what I've learned is that life is this perpetual system of growing and learning despite the experience that we might have with doing something. And I think as we look at this theme for life together, A lot of our life together as a church is found here in these walls, in this auditorium. And that is how we worship together. And as we start to look throughout Scripture, I think it's important and also beneficial for us that we further examine how to worship and why we should worship. I was doing some just quick math. I was raised in the church. My parents, I think I was 2 weeks old, and there I was in church, and so I was attending worship services before I could even speak. And with that in mind, I've had over 3,100 different worship services that I've been a part of in my life. You would think with over 3,000 worship services that I would be an expert in worship. But unfortunately, experience does not always equate expertise. Experience is mainly just exposure, whereas expertise is some sort of mastery over the subject. And I think that there is plenty of opportunity for us as a church that as we start to learn more from God's Word, as we start to develop in our spirituality, that we never cease to grow. We as Christians should never plateau in our knowledge or in our willingness or desire to want to grow more in our spirituality. And so as we look at this theme of life together in worship over the next few weeks on Sunday night to the next week on Sunday morning, we're going to be looking at what does worship do for us? What are we doing in worship? How do we worship? Why do we worship? All those questions kind of leading up to, can we maybe fortify our ability to worship and be more of a blessing to each other and perhaps more of a blessing to God in that worship? And so this evening, we're going to look at three main points of worship and what it is. What do we find in worship when we come here to this building or even outside of these walls when we're worshiping God alone in private? What do we find in worship? Well, number one, I think that we find communion with God when we worship. That word might automatically kind of associate itself with the Lord's Supper. That's typically what we call it. In other denominations, in other church circles, some might say the Eucharist, where you're able to take the bread and bless it, or at least give thanks for it, and take the fruit of the vine and bless it, give thanks for it. This is a time of fellowship, but communion is not just limited to the Lord's Supper. Communion comes from the Latin phrase communo, which is actually kind of a variation off of the Greek koinonia, which simply just means fellowship. And so when we worship God, communion, our fellowship with God, is what we find. And one of the greatest places, and maybe one of the first places that we should look in terms of what does this look like, is Genesis chapter 22. In Genesis 22, you have a lot of things that have kind of led up to this point of Abraham sacrificing his only son, Isaac. You see, back in Genesis chapter 12, you have Abraham, who is initially introduced to God, Yahweh God. From other passages like Joshua 24, we know that Abraham's fathers worshipped other gods. And so maybe this was something that was kind of radically new to Abraham as he starts his journey with Yahweh. But when you get to Genesis chapter 12 and then eventually Genesis chapter 13, what you find is God blessing Abraham and saying, I'm going to make you a father of many nations. And the subsequent chapters are going to show that Abraham had his doubts about this. He was old in age. His wife Sarah was old in age. And how are you supposed to have children when you're this old of age? And yet God was telling him that he was going to be the father of many nations. Well, then you fast forward and he has a son through Sarah, Isaac. And Isaac was his only son at this point, and he loved him. In fact, Genesis chapter 22, we see this word for love pop up for the first time in the Hebrew text, the word ahav. And this is signifying, notice how it's God in Genesis chapter 22, that this is signifying that Abraham had a deep desire, a passion, a pursuit toward his son Isaac. In Genesis chapter 22 and verse 2, he said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I shall tell you. And so God, as a witness to Abraham and his son Isaac, is able to tell, just by being there, that Abraham loves his son Isaac. This was one of the most cherished possessions that Abraham had. And certainly was the case for many Jewish families. If their lineage or genealogy stopped with them, that was a terror, and that was something that they regretted and did not want. And so having children was a blessing, and we know that that's a blessing. But it was more so that your lineage would continue. And so God witnesses and tells Abraham, "This is your son whom you love. Go and offer him as a sacrifice." And you think back to our worship. What are we offering God on Sunday morning or Sunday night or even throughout the week as we do worship God, as we pray to him, as we sing to him, as we lift up his name in praise? Are we lifting up something that we love or something that we're mainly just obligated to do because that's the right thing to do as a Christian? And here in Genesis chapter 22, we see the first word for love, but we also see the first instance in which man worships God. You'll see the word worship or bow down in other texts before this in Genesis, but in Genesis chapter 22, it's the first time that the English translators translate it as worship because it's directed to God and not toward angels or not toward men. And when you keep on reading in verse 3 through 5, so Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut down the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy will go over there and worship and come to you again." And so Abraham knew that this offering, that this communion with God was going to ultimately result in a sacrifice of his son Isaac. He didn't know all the details of it. He just knew that this was a time to obey God. And in that worship comes obedience. It's a recognition that I am a lesser being, I'm a lesser value than God supreme, than God Almighty. And therefore, whatever God tells me to do, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to leave that toward opinion or toward subjectivity. It's going to be completely up to God what he wants. And notice that this was one of Abraham's most prized possessions, his son, his only son, the one whom he loved according to God. And yet, Abraham listened and he obeyed. I think it's interesting that the text says in the next morning, he got up and he went. And sometimes we're so hesitant to do what God says because we want to weigh all the options, and that's not faith. But when we look at faith and trust in Genesis chapter 22 and verse 10, we see that Abraham was about to go through with the sacrifice. He raised his hand with the knife there in his grasp, and he was about to sacrifice his only son Isaac. And it was until the angel of the Lord stopped him and offered this ram as a substitute. And there's this absolute trust that is symbiotic with obedience in this worship. That when Abraham told the rest of the people, "I'm going to Mount Moriah and I'm going to go worship God," this was an intentional act that involved love, it involved obedience, it involved trust, but then ultimately it resulted in community. And that's why I think we find communion with God when we worship. Notice in Genesis chapter 22, verse 15 through 18, what you find there is Abraham passed the test. If you go all the way back to 22:1, it says that God was testing Abraham, trying to put into the test to see if his faith would stack up to what he thought it would. And Abraham passed that test, and now there's this equal trust on both ends, that God can trust Abraham and Abraham can trust God, that the two can now work together. Again, that Latin word communion or community coming from the Greek koinonia, there's this fellowship that's there. That means that when I worship God, I not only find love, I not only find reason to extend that love to God and to offer up something that is precious to me and something that is personal to me. I'm not just offering up songs because they sound good or songs because the words maybe have some sort of theological significance. I'm offering up something that I love to God and something that means a lot to me. And that type of worship carries us beyond Sunday and into the week. But also, secondly, I think that when we worship, it's a reset to our soul. There are so many times in graphic design as I'm making something that I just scrap it and reset and I start with a blank canvas. There's so many times that as I'm writing a paper and I'm about to submit that paper to a professor, I think, I don't really like how that turned out, and so I delete it. The recent one was 15 pages. I just deleted it and thought, that's not what I want to submit. And I start over from a blank canvas and a blank outline, and I go from there. And sometimes, likewise, we need a reset to our soul because there are things that are happening in this life that really tear us down and bog us down. There are ways that we see things on the news or things on social media or things that happen with our own families or things that are happening within the world, whether it's personal or even interpersonal, that wear us out. And what more better of an opportunity than to go to God in worship. And when you look at the Psalms, this is just a quick overview of some of these Psalms. The Psalms are exactly that. It's a reset to the soul for many of these psalmists as they look at the world around them and they begin to praise and worship God. It's a reset. And it's a way for them to get their mind back on God and not the things of the world. Psalm 73 is one of my favorite Psalms in the collection that we have because Asaph deals with something that's very personal to us and I think very personal to me as well. And that is, he looks out at the world and he sees the wicked as they prosper and as they have everything that they could ever want. And he says, God, you're a good God. Why don't you do anything about this? Why is it that the people who hate you and despise you and misuse your name and don't even acknowledge you, why are they the ones who are prospering? And I'm here and I'm devoted to your service and I'm doing everything that I can and I'm trying to be faithful to you. And yet I feel like I'm just overwhelmed with difficulty and troubles and sorrows and lack of self-worth. And why do I feel this way when I look out and see the world? And then you go to Psalm 73 and right about the middle, he says, until I entered the sanctuary of God, I realized that their end is destruction. You see, for Asaph, he was distracted by the world around him, by the prosperity of those who hated and despised God. And then you get to Psalm 73, verse 15 and 17, and you look at how things start to transition for him. And he says, it wasn't until I entered into the sanctuary, until I entered into the temple, the house of God, that I realized there's so much more to this world than just prospering out there. It's a focus of I can be prospering in my soul, in my spirit. And that's something that only God can give me, not the world. But then you go to Psalm 92, and if you have your English translation there, typically the heading will say something to the effect of a psalm for Sabbath. And you think about the Sabbath day, it was basically a forced reset for the people. On the seventh day, they work and they work and they work. And then the seventh day, you're supposed to stop working, stop doing everything, and just sit and reflect on God and the rest that he provides us. And same deal with this, with the Psalm of 92, you have someone who is looking out and seeing all these wicked and horrible people, and he says, they don't get it, they don't know. But sometimes it takes a Sabbath rest for us to realize that there is an opportunity to reset our spirit whenever we go to God and worship. Psalm 122 is a psalm of ascent, meaning that these were typically psalms that were sang as they went up into Jerusalem to go worship God at the temple. In Psalm 122, he says, I rejoice, in verse 1, with those who said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. I remember as a young child that there were times where I didn't want to go to church. You know, as horrible as that sounds. Even as a teenager, there were times I didn't want to go to church. And even times as an adult where I thought, man, I don't want to go to church. It's either a lot of effort or I have too much going on or there's something going on in my life that I just don't want to be there. But there's never been a time that I've gone and I've left and I said, oh man, I really regretted going there. And the psalmist tunes his mind to saying, I'm glad when people tell us, let us go to the house of the Lord. Because it's this time that we're able to reset our minds, to reset our spirit, and to focus ourselves on what really matters of the worship of God. And not only to do that ourselves, but to do that with a collection. I'm so thankful for the church here at North MacArthur. While we were back in Colorado, there were multiple times where we said, man, we just can't wait to see the college group or the different people here because we're just so excited to come and worship with you guys and to fellowship with you guys. There's an opportunity here at North Mac. There's an opportunity in God's church to say, I'm glad when people say, let's go to the house of the Lord. Exodus 15 is arguably one of the first Psalms, even though it's not in the collection of Psalms. There are many Psalms that point to it. And it's really a song of Moses after he's come out of this incredible display of God's power in Egypt. And as they've been rescued from the Egyptians and their bondage of slavery, they've been liberated and they're now free people. And they've just now witnessed everything that went on in that. And notice what Moses says, you will bring them in and plant them on the mountain in your inheritance, the place, Lord, you made for your dwelling, the sanctuary, Lord, your hands established. After this incredible victory, this mountaintop experience of watching God rescue you personally from Egypt, now is the time to stop and to worship. Now is the time to reflect on the house of the Lord, the dwelling place where God is, and to find yourself resetting all the things that are going on in life. You know, there are times that it's not only the negative things in life that get you down, sometimes it's the positive things that can overwhelm you. Job opportunities, new relationships, new friendships. There are a lot of things that can wear you down because it requires a lot of work and it requires a lot of attention. And yet there is still an opportunity for us to worship God in that and to reset our soul on what really matters. And then third and finally, worship is an expression of faith. It's something that we do to express our faith, our trust, our loyalty to God. Perhaps the most purest definition of worship, both in the Hebrew and in the Greek text, is to bow down. And I think that it's really interesting that when you go to the Gospel of Luke, what you find is kind of this thread that Luke is making of these different reactions of people in different situations and how they react to Jesus. And there are several different instances where they are struck with some sort of emotion or thought that they fall down before Jesus. In Luke chapter 5 and verse 8, Jesus appears before some of his early disciples, early apostles, and he shows power over nature by giving them more fish than what they had originally thought was possible. And after this incredible display and this miracle, Peter is filled with awe, and he goes down and he falls down before Jesus, recognizing that this is a much more powerful being than I am. And perhaps for the first time in his life, realizing that this is the Messiah, the awaited one, the chosen one, who is going to bring us redemption and salvation. You have the leper in Luke chapter 5 and verse 12 who is not yet healed and cleansed, and he's filled with all sorts of desperation, trying to be healed, and he goes and he falls down before Jesus because he realizes that Jesus, from the things that he's heard and some of the rumors that are going around, he needs help, and Jesus is the one who can help him. And so there was this essence of falling down before Christ. The demon-possessed man, what's interesting is this is actually the demon speaking out of the man. And the demon-possessed man throws himself at the feet of Jesus, and the demons speak out, claiming that this is the Lord, this is the Christ, the Son of God. And it's this act of humility that even from the opposing team, the demons, they're able to cry out before God. Jairus, as he shows up to Jesus, absolutely devastated and heartbroken, knowing that his daughter is about to die and that she is fading quickly. He's out of options, and he's on a very urgent time crunch. And he goes to Jesus and he falls down before him. Out of absolute need and out of absolute heartbrokenness, Jesus is the only one that can heal his daughter. The sick woman, when Jesus is passing by, just a few verses after Jairus falls down before Jesus and the crowds are starting to overwhelm Jesus, this woman who has been hemorrhaging for several years, she's spent all of her money, Luke says, on doctors and physicians to no avail. Nothing can help this woman. There's nothing that she's done or the people around her that have done to help her from this sickness. And she goes and she thinks to herself, if I could just touch the hem of his garment, I would be healed. And she does so in a very interesting manner in Luke's gospel. Power goes out of Jesus and heals her, and he stops and he says, "Who touched me?" And this woman, now immediately healed from the power of Christ, falls down before Jesus and proclaims him as the healer of her life. Someone who is entirely hopeless. A few chapters later, you have these different Samaritans that come to Jesus and who need healing, and Jesus heals many of them. And yet there was only one that returned back. And it was this cleansed Samaritan who comes back, and he falls down before the feet of Jesus, and he's thankful. When I look at these different examples just from the Gospel of Luke of falling down or bowing down before Jesus in adoration, in praise, and worship, it challenges an introspective thought in my mind of, am I worshiping with my heart or am I worshiping out of habit? What are the different ways and reasons why we worship? Why do you worship tonight? Is it only because God is God, or is it because he's worked in your life? Is it because he's worked in the lives of the ones you love? Is it because you know that he holds the future and you are trusting your future, your family, your life with him, and that's why you praise? Or are we praising because this is just what we do on Sundays and it's expected from us? Are you worshiping because you're afraid that you're going to get a phone call if you don't show up and saying, hey, we missed you on Sunday, where have you been? Are we worshiping because we've gone through these different emotions of simply being in awe of God, of finding ourselves at desperate spots in our life, of finding humility and realizing, wow, I had a plan and that plan didn't work out, and now I'm trusting in God's plan? Is there a point with us that we are heartbroken, and so we turn to God and worship like David did at the loss of his first son when he died, and he goes to God and worship over his heartbrokenness? You see, worship is powerful when it's personal, but only when it's personal. And that kind of asks the question, each season of life provides another opportunity to worship God. And what season of life are you in? What are some of the things that are on your mind as you start to contemplate, why do I worship? Is it just because we have friends here and we have a community here? Or is it because God has walked you through this life up to this point? Is it because you've realized that you can't do this all on your own and that you need God, and He's come through and He's given you reason to praise and reason to worship? I think when we look back at what we find when we worship, we find communion with God. There's this personal devotion that we have with God in which we can connect with Him and realize that He is our God. That as we worship, there's this time that resets our soul. There are a lot of things going on in this life, and there have been so many songs that we've been singing recently that capture and completely arrest my mind, in which the lyrics take over and I'm at peace. And I realize that, yeah, there's a lot going on out there, but there's so much peace here. Not just in this building, but in the presence of God. And as we worship God, there's this opportunity that we can find ourselves not only communing, not only resetting our mind, but that we can find a place where we can connect with God in ways that maybe we hadn't before. So as we go out through our seasons of life and different ups and downs of life, let me challenge you that as we start to look at some of these lessons on worship, maybe there's opportunities that I can worship even more throughout the week, and that there are other opportunities to worship God other than just Sunday morning. You know, our theme of life together is one that I think is incredibly needed in this world. Experts have said that even though we are so connected online, we are disconnected in person. And whatever the case or whatever the reason that is, we have each other here, and God's given us a beautiful blessing of the church.